Good morning. My name is Amal Nirgodkar. I'm the CEO of Patient Prism, and we're here this morning on April 15, 2020. Officially, the tax filing deadline for most individuals in the United States. Obviously, that deadline has been extended till July 15, considering that we are in the crisis of our lifetime, which is the COVID-19 crisis that has kind of crippled our nation for a little while, at least. And we're sitting at our homes. I am, and so is Mike here, talking about all things that are relevant to us today. And we wanted to get a CPA who's been in the dental space for a very long time, well respected in this industry as a thought leader in the name of Mike White. And he's here joining us today to talk about the state of the industry, talk about what's happening in the dental industry with respect to accounting, tax issues, what's happening with the loans, with the EIDL. We have lots of acronyms that we've learned over the last month. And then he's going to eventually end this webinar with some sort of comeback tips. Mike is a partner and principal at CLA, Clifton Larson Allen, an amazing CPA firm nationwide. He's been around the industry for about over 15 years, and he has specialized truly in accounting and CFO services for individual practices as well as DSOs. So with that introduction, welcome Mike White to our webinar this morning, and we're excited to really chat with you about many things that you're encountering today as you're helping clients with in dealing with this crisis.
Thank you so much for having me, and certainly under these circumstances, I appreciate being here. And Amal, we've been talking about doing this for so long, and all it took was for us to dial in from our home offices to have these conversations. So I appreciate everybody's time today, and hopefully you find some insight into what we're trying to share. Amal in his CPA world and my CPA world, and now just trying to help everybody in the dentistry space and as small business owners, as individuals. I'm excited to be here. So, a lot of things that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks and last few weeks has been around the EIDL program, the PPP program, and what's going on. And of course, initially shutting down the practice and then opening back up, which we'll cover each one of those phases today. So I certainly appreciate being here and having me on.
Absolutely. So let's start really. What we have seen the last 2 weeks, maybe the last 3 weeks, I think the president signed the CARES Act towards the end of March. And obviously all of us, all dental practices for sure, have been in this phase of, okay, let's apply for the PPP loan, let's apply for the EIDL loan. And I think many of them did apply. Some of them couldn't qualify. They're still figuring out what to do. So give us a status update on what's happening with respect to the loans, what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, it's been quite the rollout. For the last few weeks, as we mentioned, we've been doing all these conversations, and I've been having daily, multi-daily phone calls with all the respective banks, trying to keep up with where they are in the cycle. But I think we first start with a framework of what each program is, because I think that's important. Originally was the EIDL loan, the disaster recovery loan, and it became state by state, and initially all states, or eventually all states became a disaster zone for purposes of that. And what was released there was a loan program up to $2 million in lending. That was really good SBA terms effectively, and they were effectively going to have everybody approved for it. What has come out of it is very few people got any more than $25,000 approved, which has been the problematic. So I had several practices that were applying for $300,000, $500,000, $1 million, because it was less than 4% rate, 30% loan, or 30-year loan, and it allowed them to do everything except for the same buckets for the PPP. You could effectively do the same thing, but if you wanted the forgiveness of the PPP, they need to be for two separate purposes. But as we know as business owners, there's plenty of things that you have to cover: shortfall of revenue, shortfall of other expenses, investment in capital, all that. So we'll talk about the EIDL loan there, and then the PPP program, which was the big one everybody was clamoring for. It's the forgiveness component, right? It was 2.5 times payroll, and they changed some terms constantly through the process, but effectively it's 2-year term, 1% interest rate, 6-month forgiveness, so effectively an 18-month loan after the deal's done. And they made it 2.5 times payroll, benefits, 401k, all that good stuff. But then they allowed you to forgive payroll, benefits, utilities, rent, and the interest costs that you had along the way. And you had to meet all these expectations. I think the biggest challenging thing we've had in that conversation is the business owners we've talked to, the practice owners we've talked to, are looking at this as, okay, I've already furloughed my employees. Now I can utilize this money to help me restart. And the problem with the thought process is the government's intention was to hire your employees back. You know, it was the Paycheck Protection Program. So in order for you to get the max benefit, you needed to bring all your employees back. So you're expending these dollars while you're still closed in many circumstances to bring your employees back to sit there from home, do CE or do nothing in order for you to get that forgiveness component done. So it has, as people have worked through these lending processes, if you even got the loan, which you're alluding to there a minute ago, Amal, we have a lot of folks that have not even, gotten the loan yet, gotten the E-Tran number, gotten the approval. And we, in conversations with a couple banks last night, I think we're within 24 to 48 hours of all the money being spent. And that will probably, occupy 10 to 15% of small businesses nationwide. That's it. So it's been a very trying time. Of course, they are talking about issuing some additional funds, but on the $349 billion that was dedicated to the PPP loan, as of yesterday, $270 billion had been accounted for. So interesting time to see how this plays out.
So these are some great statistics, obviously, regarding, and people have been waiting for when it's going to be funded, because obviously there's some rules regarding forgiveness of when that 8-week period starts. But let's go back a little bit to the EIDL loan, and we'll talk about PPP a little more in detail. Is it advisable for people to still apply for the EIDL loan if they have applied for the PPP?
Yes, I think so. And in any circumstance, it's really inexpensive money. And I think a lot of people, as we get to further in this dialogue, we have to think about opening back up. Amal, your prior life as a CPA and currently still my life as a CPA, we always care about cash flow. We don't want to over leverage ourselves. But in this unique circumstance where you go from 100% utilization to near zero, most of the practices we work with weren't invested more than 1.5 to 2 months of cash flow within their practice. So when you start looking at having all resources available, even if you don't end up using the money, having it on the sideline as a line of credit, as approved, then that's certainly one that you want to be able to get access to and make sure. So that one is done through SBA.gov. Simple application. There's 15 questions to answer. And I strongly recommend you apply for both.
In your experience, what is the underwriting like for EIDL loans? Are they looking at whether you have the ability to pay, or somebody's going to look at your debt to your ratios of cash flow to debt and all that stuff, or is it just as long as you are there, you're going to get the loan?
The intention from the government was government backed for both loan programs. So the intention was for them to be expending money in applications quickly. I still have applicants that applied 2.5 weeks ago that haven't heard from the SBA.gov. But you have to think traditionally the SBA fund was executed by bankers. Live Oak Bank, Bank of America, Wells, they all had their SBA programs and many other banks.
Sure.
But when you start looking at this program was, hey, go to SBA.gov and fill out an application, and they weren't ready for that. So they were getting 300,000 to 500,000 applications a day.
Wow.
And that's where the system just got completely overrun. But to your other point, that doesn't mean don't go fill out the application, because it really is supposed to be get in the queue, work through the application, submit your 15 questions, and we will get funds to you. What I have started seeing some practices as of earlier this week, late last week, getting approved for the EIDL loan and the PPP, by the way. But on the EIDL loan, if we're talking about that, and they've gotten a letter that says, hey, we've earmarked $25,000, which is that bridge loan amount, $10,000 or up to $1,000 per employee. So $10,000 would be a forgiven grant, that you can utilize as part of that loan program. If you accept, check the box, and that was the process. From there, they're still waiting to get funded, but at least they accepted that part of the loan initially. From there, what the underwriting letter continued to go on and say is, we will come back and look at the rest of your application because they're supposed to be based on 6 months of operating margins and all that. But when we get through all the applications, we're just trying to get you funds quickly. We will come back to you and look at the entire funding process for you. So that's what we're seeing so far in the EIDL loan.
So is the EIDL loan, the loan amount, is there a formula for how much you can qualify for? Is it driven by revenues or by EBITDA or anything else?
Yeah, revenue and COGS is really what its operating margin is really what they're focused on. And so for dental practices, we've made the argument for some time that supplies, lab, and associate fees are COGS, but for all intents and purposes, by definition, you can look at it as revenue and no COGS on a dental practice. So you actually get a pretty decent sized EIDL loan for intrinsic purposes, how we interpret the documents and talking to all the bankers we've spoken to of how they would look at it. So that's the guidance we've been giving based on what the bankers were telling us to do in their previous analysis. So 6 months operating cash at really good terms over 30 years is great, great access to funds. Yeah.
It's fantastic. Last question on the EIDL loan is
Yeah.
there an upper limit to how much we had 349 billion for PPP. Is there an upper limit for EIDL?
It was, my understanding was 10 billion. So much less.
Okay.
Yeah. So much larger loan, but a lot less committed to it. I think they'll have to, for both programs, they're going to have to fund a little bit further, if you will, to work through it. But, that's what's currently going to be discussed in Congress, if you will.
Yeah, I think it has to, right? I think the EIDL loan, the benefit of this EIDL loan is that the term of 30 years is really makes a big impact on your cash flow. I mean, having to do that. So let's get back. So EIDL loan, definitely apply. You might not get what you have asked for.
Right.
$1,000 per employee, and the full amount of the loan will potentially go through underwriting based on your revenue or revenue minus cost of goods sold or services.
Yeah. And they're really just looking for the verification from you, the certification and verification. So if they ever came back and audited these, which probably would be in the event of a default or something along those lines,
right?
Then that's when you'd have access to this information. But the government's intention was to not make this a huge underwriting process, which banks like to do, and let's just get the money out there quickly and do it based on the honesty and integrity of all of us as human beings and try to do this right. And for the most part, that's what we've been seeing is people have been very honest about it and trying to get the right amount that they needed in order to do this. So,
and
that's been a good thing.
And I'm assuming there's personal guarantees involved for at least the principals of the entity. Maybe 20% owners or more, I'm sure I have to do personal guarantees, and so forth. So let's get back, focus our attention on the PPP, because again, obviously most people who thought they qualified have applied for it, and as you said, I think funding is expected to happen within the next 24 to 72 hours, and then you have that period starting. So one of my first questions about the PPP is I'm baffled by the fact that yes, it's understandable. You've laid off people right now. You've furloughed them. They have potentially applied for unemployment, which is again that system is broken a little bit because it's overwhelmed with the number of people that are applying for it, and so nobody is getting any of this unemployment checks as of now. It's going to be a while before they get it. Now, you're not going to start your business. Let's say your dental practice. States have closed certain practice. Let's say till June, and you get the money today, and now you're either forced to hire all these people back with no expectation of revenue coming in, right? So how does it really help your business? If you're just, let's say you hire everybody back, and by June you exhaust all the money. Your business is not really helped. Employees are in the same spot. I mean, they got their money, and then you still have to worry about a reduced production for the next several months. And so it's not really helped you as a business. I understand it was to help paychecks, but I'm baffled with this.
Well, and you and I are both business owners, Amal, and we're speaking to so many business owners on this call. This was touted as a small business help program. And, really, this was an employee help program is really what it came down to. And that's not that's not a negative, and I don't mean for it to be a negative intention at all. But as small business owners, if you are still a essential business and that is open today, and I have several of those clients in the non-healthcare space that are still open right now, and this is free grant money. They're operational, they're generating revenue. This is great. This is truly a help to those business owners. But unfortunately, in the dentistry industry, where it was deemed non-essential for vast majority of the practices nationwide, it wasn't a help because they're closed. They were supposed to commit their PPE equipment to physicians and ERs and all that stuff.
Right.
But they're effectively closed in their practices. So what we've been talking to so many of our practices is, just because the PPP program isn't working out how we thought it was, this is still a cash flow game. Meaning, if we need to take on these funds, and that is where we get our money today, in order to keep our doors open and be able to reopen, then we need to execute and get those funds. It isn't going to work out the same way that it is for others, but for purposes of this, it becomes cash flow management. We've been preaching that. We've been doing so many budgets. For those of you who've seen me speak before, know about our budgets as our way of kind of communication and our scorecards and all that. So this was an extension of that process, and really looking at, what is your practice? So if we drop in this money now, we get approved today and we get the money within the next week, but you don't open until the end of June, what does this look like? Do we hire our employees back? Do we not? I know the intention to get the forgivable portion is to hire the employees back, but are we going to have enough money to open our doors back? Because what we expect and anticipate, and nobody knows because we've never done this before, is we probably aren't going to come back to 100% schedule. The longer this goes, the less likely that would be. Just the pent-up demand, we just don't know what that's going to look like. So I think that's the unknown right now.
I mean, so worst case scenario, do what's right for your business, and maybe use this as a low interest 2-year loan, and keep that cash, because at the end of the day, I understand we need to help the employees, but if we don't help the businesses, and the business doesn't come back, then the employee's not going to have their jobs after June anyway, right? So we've got to help businesses, because they are the engine that drives our country. Yeah. They're the engine that employs these people. And if the practice doesn't have any resources after June, and the lines of credit dry up, and they have to return this money back, you're in the same spot.
Yeah. Well, I think what's so important to realize for business owners, and I'd hope at this point, we go back even beyond the EIDL loan, the PPP loan process. There was the initial tax credits given for those that were testing positive for COVID-19, and then those that had dependent care issues and whatnot. As kind of a quick recap of those, it was by March 31st, if you had not terminated your employees and they were still on payroll as of April 1st, if they tested positive for COVID-19, you were required to pay them up to $511 a day for 10 days, 80 hours. And then if they had child care sick or out, schools closed, there was a litany of other reasons, then you had to pay them up to 2/3 pay or $200 a day for 12 or 10 weeks. Initially it was 12, 10 weeks in addition to that. And that would be processed through your normal payroll, and there would be credits back to the employer, but you're floating that money again.
Sure.
So our first discussion with so many practice owners was truly, are we closing our office? Are we opening them? Are we terminating / laying them off? If you furloughed them, then you possibly at risk, but that's an HR thing. We won't get into that today. But we really have to work through all that situations. So those determinations of what business owners, made those decisions with their employees, and I know it's a hard one, because, these are your team. These are people who've gotten you through all the good years, and you want to take care of them. But in some cases, especially with the unemployment process, if executed properly, it was supposed to take care of them better than for you were. That's what it was set up for, except for your doctors. Did you defer your rent? Did you defer your mortgage payment, your debt payments? Did you call your vendors and say, hey, let's still want you, but let's hold off or pause or something along those lines? Or can we, make 50% payments for a little while, things like that. There was a lot of decisions that had to be made quickly. And I think a lot of our practice owners did make the decisions. And we had some that said, I'm going to keep my employees on. I'm going to hold on to them. And, now here we are towards the end of the month, like, well, this may go on longer than I thought it would.
Right.
Now what do I do? So we're having a lot of those conversations now too.
And obviously, now that the funding and the PPP application process is over, now the focus turns to forgiveness and
Yep.
strategies around forgiveness. And there is some basic guidelines right now issued by the SBA with respect to the full-time equivalents that you need to have, the numerator and the denominator. Their
Yeah.
denominator is either 19 or 20, just like the IRS, right? We're used to all this stuff, right? As CPAs,
Yes. Yes.
we're used to all
Yeah.
this complexity. But if you don't have a CPA right now, believe me, hire one,
Yeah.
because it is so complex. Trying this at home might land you in trouble, because there is certain things that you have to deal with in terms of how many employees you need in that 8-week period divided by that. And if you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll continue this discussion.
Well, I think what's so important for everybody, one, and this is very hard for all of us right now, it's patience through the process. The sense of urgency for all of us is incredibly high. I don't know that I've had a normal night's sleep in the last month. I somehow, for some reason, I always woke up early, but now 2 a.m. is my new wake up call. But when you look at this and even how the PPP calculator was determined, I saw 20 iterations of the calculator and so many different iterations of how it was interpreted. And every bank initially was interpreting it differently. So when we start talking about the forgiveness component, we're going to have the same thing. You know, CLA has stood up a COVID task force, that we have a team dedicated to monitoring all this, reading the legislation, you know, working through all the calculators. We even have a team that is applying for the loans on behalf of practices and working through that process. But when you look at that calculator on the forgiveness, just as the calculator at the bank level was supposed to be created, that forgiveness component is going to be created by the bank as well. We're creating our own, but we have to mirror back to what the bank is going to do, because the bank is the one who has to execute that forgiveness, usually within 60 days, they said, of deploying the funds. So this first wave of getting the funds, now there's another application wave of deferring those funds. And these are the same bankers that are also working on deferring the mortgage payments or the debt payments every month. So completely overwhelmed in the entire process. So patience is key. But when we look at that forgiveness, you know, it's back to that 75% of your payroll by the end of June needs to be back. And the look back period becomes, did we fully execute and utilize those funds to spend on this purpose of bringing our employees back, putting them on payroll, you know, spend the rest of the money on rent, utilities, and interest payments. And if we did, there's supposed to be a level of forgiveness. And they've been making the comment that they anticipate 75% of loans to be forgiven. And I don't know if that's just because not everybody will ramp up their payroll at what they expect it to be. If this is because some of these debt payments, rent, and things were deferred, so they didn't actually have those payments after all. And, you know, kind of working through all that. So, but the intention is for you to put your employees back to work. The forgiveness is for you to spend the money on them, and get them back to work, to get the unemployment rates down, and work through all that. So that's what we're going to see on that calculator. I think there will be one created. I think we're within a few days of creating our own from a calculation standpoint, but that's what I understand as of yesterday we're working through.
I think one of the criteria is, which I think we have the IRS guidelines of what constitutes a full-time equivalent, which is the 30 hours per week. I think the IRS guidelines currently. So you take the number and divide that by 120, the hours, and see where they are in terms of FTEs. SBA might have a different guidance regarding that. And it is my understanding, and you can confirm me if I'm wrong, is that you don't have to have the same people come back as long as there's bodies there. That matters, and obviously the salary as well.
That's our understanding as well. Yeah. Because we understand some people, team members are going to change. Sorry, didn't mean to overstep there, but we understand team members are going to change. I think the government understands people may have found another job in this interim time period and said, I don't want to come back to this industry. Right. So it's back to the FTE and then of course the payroll dollars as well.
And they may not want to come back because the unemployment benefits are sweet for the next 4 months. So if it's $4,000 a month, I'm going to, you know, a lot of people are going to say, you know what, I'm going to make $4,000 a month for the next. And I think given that this is election year, neither Congress nor the president is going to, they most likely will extend the $600 through December, January, until after the election is over. We still are waiting on guidance. We're still waiting on guidance in terms of in terms of getting that 75% salary up, can we pay the owners more? Right, that's going to be interesting. And can, if the owners are not even taking salary, can they be put on salary? If their
Yeah.
employees over $100,000, can we increase their salary? I mean, there's going to be
Yeah.
so many things that are going to be, because what somebody could do is that, okay, I'm going to just increase owners compensation so that I meet the 75% test. And is that going to be okay? So there's going to be a lot of things, and I think by the time the government figures out with this regulations, it's 60 days going to be over.
Yep. When I
So
think the critical thing, you're right, and of course there's that $100,000 cap for employees and bonusing, and all those comments you've just made, I've had every one of those questions relative to, can I do this, can I do that, and it's still unknown. I mean, they're still standing up clarifying guidance on the initial application of the PPP, which I think we're done with that now.
right.
But as of 48 hours ago, I wasn't sure. But they're going to now start, setting up the exceptions and the exclusions and all those guidelines relative to how do we get the max forgiveness possible and what's your interpretation. And then it really is going to come down to that calculation, getting with your banker to say, what does that look like? And does that make sense? And did I get these payroll reports right? And all that type of stuff. So, and it's certainly going to be a interesting time. And it certainly, again, comes back to cash flow. Do we, pay Sally Jane? And as I always use Sally Jane, it's just a random person, but do we pay Sally Jane a one-time bonus to be able to get to that forgiven amount? And do we,
Right.
bring up a few people and not? And so all those what if scenarios, we hope to have more guidance here in the next week. And Amal, I know you and I talked about doing a series of these because, we're going to continue to see information come out. And I think it's really important to stay on top of it that way, to see how do we interpret it, how do we execute it, and then of course, how do we manage cash flow in the next month and a half, 2 months, possibly 6 months, because I think this is going to be a 6 to 12 month impact on overall operations and scheduling.
Agreed. And we'll definitely do more of these as we get more guidance, and it might be weekly guidance that
Yeah, maybe
that given, just like the PPP stuff. So let's pivot a little bit from the loans to really operations and financial planning and financial management. CLA has taken the lead under your leadership in the healthcare group to really implement business intelligence within the organization. And you've got a good product called Intuition. I believe it's called Intuition,
Yep. Yeah,
which does modeling of what if scenarios. And I'm thinking that that product has been put to good use right now, given the fact that we're trying to figure out scenarios of what might happen, depending on what ends up happening when we open our practices. So tell me, what are you doing in that realm, helping your dental practices with respect to the Intuition product, as well as the scenario analyses?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So CLA's had Intuition for a few years, which is based on Microsoft Power BI product. It's been morphing our scorecard dashboards into Power BI over the last 12 months. And we hope to have something launched there on that side as well in the next couple months. But when we look at this Intuition model, we restood it up for a COVID planning tool is what we called it. And what we did there is said, if we let our employees go on this date, we intend to bring them back on this date, we can even layer in employees at different tranches. And then, of course, what does that recapture curve mean? So when we look at a revenue, if March was 80% because we missed the last week or so, or 90% for the last 2 weeks, and then April and May were 0, what does that recapture rate look like? So we look at that COVID planning curve. We says, okay, if we're going to come back to business in June 1st, and depending on where you are in the nation, is that confidence level of where you're coming back. Here in Texas, I think we're going to be back to new normal in the end of the month. I think that's what our governor here is saying. I think some of the Southeast may follow, but the same West Coast, Pac West. I think they're going to go a little longer. I think they're going to go into June. I think they're going to go into late May and all that stuff. But depending on where you are in the marketplace, and I know we're talking to everybody nationally, we have to pick that date of when are you going to make the determination to open your doors back up, and what does that look like? Practices I was talking to in the Pac West this week and West Coast, we were speculating, what if they only allow us to have 1 patient per hour, in chairs? So where we normally do 20 patients a day, we can only do 10, or we can only do 12, or whatever that may be. what does that look like? So this COVID planning tools allows us to, at a high level, say we're going to come back for the first month, second month, third month at this kind of recapture rate of 25, 50, 75, and then 100% at month 4, to understand what does our revenue curve look like. And the same with layering in our expenses and how that looks. The whole intention is how much cash do we need? We ended the March timeframe with 100,000 in cash and another 100,000 in receivables, and we kept Sally Jane on to collect some receivables, or I, Dr. Owner, were collecting those receivables. Sure. When we stand back up and we start producing again, we're going to have expenses immediately, but our cash won't come back for maybe another month after that. So understanding that dynamic flow of your business model and, how does this look and when do you bring back the Sally Janes of the world and your associates, and, even having some of the conversation, does the doctor come back and do hygiene for a little bit and we don't bring back the hygienist? These are all what if scenarios, but things that we have to talk about in understanding your schedule. We'll get to here in a minute of what should we be doing now. And there's a lot of things that we should be doing right now, but as you start thinking through this intuition model, this COVID planning model that we've built, we're really working through those what if scenarios with you. And that also then fills in the gap of how much money am I going to come out of pocket? Do I have a line of credit? What if I get some PPP money? What if I get some idle money? Where are my sources of cash going? Because our ultimate determination is how much money do we need? And if we need 200,000 over the rest of the year, how are we going to get it? And that's where we start executing on those ideas and executing on the strategy of filling in that gap, either deeper cuts or alternative revenue sources or additional, personal money that has to come into the business to stand it back up.
It's super important. I think when you can plan like this, using a tool that you guys have developed, it really provides the peace of mind to a business owner today, because it's overwhelming. Just how many things you need to think about, and obviously planning for your cash flow over the next 6 to 8 months as we navigate this stuff, and having specific KPIs and metrics there that have forecasted what it might be is going to give you a huge peace of mind, because knowing that you have the money to kind of sustain during this time period, that's going to actually, as a business owner, going to free up your time and focusing on your business and operations and the comeback stuff, which we're going to talk about, right? Figure out this financial stuff first with your CPA. If you don't have one, you can contact Mike. And obviously he's busy, but contact your CPA, figure this out, figure out your cash flow over the next 6 months to a year, and know that this is going to be okay, and you can make the adjustments accordingly to your staff team members and your dentist. But this is great. I love the modeling aspect of it through the Power BI stuff that you're doing through Intuition. Really, really important to do this now while you have the time, and prepare yourself from a financial standpoint. So that's great. I think great advice there. You're
and
also.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No. I was going to say, you're right. Whether you're using us and or using your existing CPA, certainly talk to whomever you have advisory. Some of you even may have advisory accountants on staff or CFOs on staff, and you're running these what if scenarios. And the hardest thing, and I'm never a pessimist. I'm always this optimist. My wife and I love her. I married another CPA, but she's always what she calls realist in the relationship. But in this circumstance, I'm trying to be the realist of saying, what if this isn't nearly as good as we thought? Because if we outperform that number, great. That's just upside, if you will, and we're in a better position. But if we underperform our rosy picture, then we're really putting ourselves in a bigger detriment because we didn't plan to fill that gap again.
Right.
But yeah, so whether, we certainly have capacity. We're working with clients nationwide in our 120 plus offices. But, when we look at this conversation, by all means, talk to your existing CPA. If this is something they can do, then please, by all means. I know, Amal, you and I are just trying to help as many people as we can think through the what if scenarios. This isn't about selling anything right now.
Absolutely.
We're just trying to help as much as we possibly can.
I agree with that 100%. So we've talked about the loans. We've talked about some planning around financial statements. One of the things I've been telling people is that get your financials in order, make sure your books
Yeah.
are up to date. Even though you don't have a filing deadline right now, I would still get all the stuff up to date and then engage in some modeling. So let's say you figured this out, you've secured loans, gotten cash in, you've modeled your cash flow and expenses and revenue for the next 6 to 8 months. Now you have the time to really figure out how you're going to restart, how are you going to come back,
Yeah.
and I'm sure those discussions are also starting out right now in the middle of April with your clients. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, those last few weeks have been all about, preservation of cash as much as possible, becoming that CFO for our clients that we always were, and, shutting it down effectively. And now it's about the rebuild. And these conversations that we're starting to have this week, it's, what are you going to do? Now you get to build with an existing patient base, with a recare schedule that's, should be more full than as a startup, but you get to rebuild as a startup. So all those things that you talked about doing administratively, operationally, financially, that if you just had time to get to, now is that time. So often, Amal, and you and I have talked about this at these conferences, in talking to bankers, and in my experience over the years and your experience over the years, the average financial statement that we see is 90 days old from a new client that's coming in.
Right.
And when you're seeing aged financials like that, okay, use this opportunity to get caught up, because now you need better data, for that what if scenario that you and I always talked about. Now,
Right.
Here we are. We need good data to plan off of. So when we're looking through that situation, get your financials caught up right now, and then stay on a regular pace, because we need to be tracking cash and performance better and more than ever now. The KPIs that we refer to, a lot of people say, well, I just want to budget at a highest level. I did 100,000 last January. I want to do 110,000 this January. And I'm that guy that said, great, how many doctor days, production per patient, number of patients seen? Well, now that really becomes a real conversation. If we're going to get back to 100, are we going to be expanding hours? Are we going to be expanding our schedule? Are we going to expand the number of associates we have? How, bring the specialty in and work through that whole deal? Those are the things, the conversation strategically we should be doing. But going back to the question of what should we be doing right now? Well, for those of us who have a definitive date, and I say definitive very loosely, meaning here in Texas, the TDA is saying April 22nd, but the state is saying stay at home till the end of the month. So, we're really kind of utilizing that May 1st guideline to start filling that schedule. We realize we have some inconvenience in possibly moving those patients again, but we want to be top of mind with that patient. Sure. We understand, as you alluded earlier, that we understand the employment numbers. People may not have dental insurance, this may not be a priority for them, but we want to make sure it stays as a priority as they get back to some normalcy. And then there's certainly going to be cases where maybe the patient didn't feel or did feel that it was an essential need that they had to get something fixed, but they didn't want to risk going to see their dentist. So I anticipate some pent-up demand. We don't know what that's going to be, but I hope there is. We all do. But we really want to start getting on top of that schedule now. So if you don't have anybody working your schedule and you're going to wait till the last minute, or wait until you have final guidance on when you can open back up, I truly think we're going to go into April 30th, May 1st, not knowing when I go to bed April 30th, they were really opening up on May 1st. Right. I just don't know if they're going to make a last minute call or strategy change or something's going to happen. So if we wait till the last minute to start filling our schedule, then we're going to be behind the 8 ball. So I would say filling the schedule is going to be a critical thing. Confirming insurance through that process. Making sure that they still do have insurance. That's a hard conversation, but make sure they do. And if they don't, start looking at some of the membership plans or opportunities or alternatives that you possibly have. And when you're filling your schedule and start looking at the insurance programs, I would also give your team some authorization on your schedule. If you're a normal 9 to 5, Monday through Thursday, half day Friday schedule, and they start filling that schedule, then talk to them and say, hey, I'm willing to open up on 7 to 5 or 7 to 7, 3 days a week or whatever it may be. And I'll even come in on Saturday or full day Friday, because you're trying to recapture as much patient flow as you possibly can so you don't lose so much pent up demand. Sure. And that's easier for our GP practices. Specialty may be a little bit harder. Orthodontics, the hardest thing for them is going to be starts, the number of starts that they missed during this time. So they're probably going to get back to their cases right away. But 12 months from now, 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now, they're going to feel those starts that they missed during that time. And hopefully they can capture with some expanded hours and stuff as well. But, I'll stop there. But I do think scheduling is one of the biggest things that we should be focused on
Right.
after getting your operationals and things like that set up.
And how you triage that process, right? Who comes first, hygiene versus
Yeah.
needed treatment. And I think it's going to be absolutely the most important, managing your schedule. It was always important in dentistry to not have open times and making sure that everything is, but now you're going to have the opposite problem. You're going to have all these patients coming in and you only have those. But if you don't expand hours, don't expand capacity, and your patients might go somewhere else because
Yeah.
they still need the dental care that they need, and you're not available. So thinking about that is super important. PPE. What conversations are you talking to your clients about PPE?
Yeah.
And the budget around PPE too.
Yeah. And so a lot of our practices have kind of slowed down on a lot of services, of course, including some of us in the bookkeeping side, but kept on the CFO staff. But PPE, we told them to continue on ordering right now because a lot of the suppliers today are limiting the amount that you can get. So if you want some built up demand and maybe you donated all yours, or maybe you even didn't, but you didn't have your normal ordering cycle, I would continue to order some of those, services and supplies that you're going to need on the tail end of this. And PPE is certainly one of those things. I have practices that have been buying black market PPE from overseas, out of trunks of cars, out of whatever they possibly could to get their hands on things. But I think those supplies you have to, go back to what else you could be doing in your downtime. Inventory what you have. So often in practices we over order in supplies, and every time the supplier comes in, we just make an order. Now is a good time to really get your hands around what have you spent money on, what do you not need when you reorder, and what should you be ordering during this downtime, especially if you're going to expand hours beyond your normal flow and volume. And if you have to look for alternative sources on PPE and other products, then now's the time, as I know some suppliers can't get their hands on it themselves.
Right. I mean, I think it's very smart advice to tell people to continue ordering, knowing that you're going to be probably consuming maybe 3 to 4 times more PPE. I mean, you may have to change this outerwear and mask every single time. I mean, you will have to use up a lot of it.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, the supply chain is completely disrupted today. A lot of the PPE is going to hospitals and critical care places. And not having PPE is going to prevent you from doing the dentistry anyway. So not that you hoard like people are hoarding toilet paper. That's not the point. Which is kind of, I don't understand it.
I don't either.
But PPE, continue your normal cycle. Even within your projections that you're doing, you need to look at what the demand is going to be potentially. If you're at 50%, 75%, or 90% of production, and take the PPE you had before, multiply it by a certain amount, and start accumulating that so that you can actually see patients.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think when we do open up, especially for those of us who open up at the end of the month, I think the expanded procedures change all PPE out between patients, wipe down sterilized rooms between patients, wipe down areas. So we're going to need some additional cleaning products, more alcohol-based wipes, things along those lines that you probably ordered, just not at the level that you need to now. So when you're planning what your opening looks like, plan for those maybe possibly overconsumption of some of these products for the short term until this levels off, because I'm certainly not a doctor, but I don't think this is just going to go away on May 1st and we're all going to go back to normal.
Right. And managing that, right? I think that's why, going back to point 2 where we had, you need to really figure out your budgets and do this analysis, because you need some money allocated to extra PPE during this time period. So it's super important to sit with your CPA and do this planning process so that you don't have any surprises coming in October. I'm like, damn, I ran out of PPE. I don't even have the money or the PPE, both.
And kind of going back to what else we should be doing right now, so once we've figured out that schedule piece of it, then you're starting to fill in your team around that schedule. The treatment planning, we may be able to fill up our recare schedule, but we aren't able to do a lot of treatment planning during that time. So, are we having an associate do hygiene? Are we bringing our hygienist back, or maybe doing expanded hygiene with assistants? And, are we working through that whole process? you really need to start filling in your gaps of what your schedule looks like and how you bring people back. Also maybe look at the Sally Janes of your office and say, she hadn't been performing the way I wanted her anyway. Now is that time to make a change, because there is going to be some turnover in the marketplace. There just naturally will be. But really start rethinking the flow of your patient experience as well. And I think that's going to be critical. Right now, we're going to need to do more with less, eke out and utilize that excess profits, excess ability to invest in the possible second wave. I mean, the what if scenarios that are going out there. I'm tired of watching the news, but at the same time, I feel I need to watch the news every day. So the what if scenarios that are being speculated out there, and as we watch, Asia and Italy and some of these other countries that are starting to open up again, and then will open up before we do in some cases, what that second wave is going to look like, what the experience is going to look like. A lot of people speculating this is a 24, 36 month ordeal until a vaccine truly comes available, that we have to work through. So being prepared for anything at this time, I don't think this is a one and done, get past this, and then we never have to deal with it again. I think we're going to be dealing with this for quite some time.
Do you think, going back to loans, do you think it's prudent right now, thinking, let's assume it's the worst case scenario, do you think it's prudent for, if you have a line of credit already approved through a bank, let's say for $200,000, and you've only drawn down 20,000 of it so far, you have 180,000 left. Is it a good idea to draw down the entire amount and keep it in cash? Because what if credit gets frozen? And you saw bank earnings this morning: Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, everybody, all of them, right? And they might tighten the credit all of a sudden. They might say, by the way, great, whatever you borrowed, that's great, but we're not give you any more loans or lines, and that might be frozen.
There's a lot of things around that, and I would say it depends on the bank. Some of the smaller community banks, I don't know that's necessary. Usually there's a lot of relationships there. Some of the bigger banks, they may decide to look at their portfolio and dentistry that's been completely shut down pretty much, being a risky part of the portfolio, pull some of those lines of credit back, especially as those same banks are facilitating the PPP loan or EIDL loan on your behalf. So no, I think when you're looking at cash flow, if that is a source of cash flow, that is possibly a scenario you want to run. It's like, okay, if I do draw down, what's my interest cost to do so? And what do my loan provisions say if I do draw down? Do I immediately term that loan out? Now do I have another payment to deal with? So, it is going to be scenario by scenario, and running that cash flow scenario with your CPA or with us is going to be critical to work through that scenario, those thought processes, if you will. But it is certainly a thought process you got to think through. I agree with that. I've heard everything from home equity lines to 401ks to mortgages, sources of capital that people will need. The reality is we will come out of this a bit more leveraged than we were before. And we have to understand what that means, and what do we have to do to overcome that? Because ultimately, we take these one-time funds, we're going to be taking less money home because we have to pay this loan payment off. If we invest in our team coming back fully, then we're going to be taking less money home, depending if our capacity doesn't fully come back. So those things we're working through, all the way from when does my mortgage payment come back online? If they did a 90-day deferment, did they balloon the payment or did they re-amortize? I've seen some that are just doing a 90-day balloon, and that just means all those 3 months payments you got to come up with once. That doesn't work out. Your suppliers, you're going to probably have some pops in supply orders on the tail end of this. You're going to kick back up your, Patient Prism, your marketing dollars, your other services. Bookkeeping is going to start back up with us. Those expenses will start coming back online fairly quickly, where your production revenue, will be slightly delayed. So. Those are the things that we all have to think about and work through that scenario.
Absolutely. With respect to home equity, what I'm seeing banks do is start slowly tightening up the refinancing or the cash out of home equity. If you've lost your job recently, there's going to be a good chance that the home equity line is not going to be automatic as it was. Although the rates are low, cash might be a little tighter, because if you can't provide them the last pay stub or tell them that you don't have an income right now, it might be tough to get that. So apply for it sooner than later.
And I know here we're running up out of time for this conversation. We'll certainly continue this, but when we're really thinking through all of this for folks, and I know, Amal, you and I don't want to sound like these dire people here. That's not the intention at all. It's thinking through everything as a business owner. Amal's thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. for our own respective businesses, but you need to be thinking about these things too. This is an opportunity. We will come out of this. It will look different.
Right.
We don't know what it's going to look like, and not all of us can speculate. But here we are as some financial guys that are talking about what if scenarios with you, and we want you to think through those what if scenarios, but also use this as an opportunity to rebuild your practice the way you want to. Look at your 3 to 5 year plan. If that including exiting the marketplace or just bringing on another associate, look at what those scenarios look like now. And dentistry isn't going to go away. We know that. It may look different. The patient experience will probably be different, at least for the short term. How do we overcome that as business owners and readapt our model to it? Opportunistically, there's a lot going on in dentistry today, and that's the exciting thing. A lot of the private equity, the bankers and all that stuff still believe in the industry, still investing in this industry. Now we just have that opportunity to really work through the growth and rebuild our businesses and think smart about it, and really fine tune those margins. If you were operating at 10, 15% margin before, you're not going to be able to do that. We need to get you to the mid-20s. We need to get you to the 30s. If you're in solo practice, we got to build up that business model so you can sustain the growth.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, this is not supposed to be a doom and gloom podcast. Absolutely not. Our purpose here is really to make you aware and take some steps beforehand in terms of planning for these resources, so that you can then focus on your business. And this is a unique opportunity. I have gotten more time to work on my business than I have ever gotten since I started Patient Prism. And I definitely believe that the dental practices or any business that really spends their time retooling their business now that because you have the time, you could come out of this ahead, because you could have a strategy around attracting patients coming in. And if you are that proactive practice that budgets correctly, plans properly, and has a strategy around the comeback, you might be in a better situation in 2021, knowing that you have a whole EIDL loan or a loan that's amortized over 30 years. You've been able to kind of take advantage of some of the government programs and retool your practice, including your operations. So absolutely, all positive. We're all here to support you through this process, and this has been so wonderful. I mean, Mike, we need to do this more, because I've enjoyed. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm a CPA too, and I've enjoyed this more than I've enjoyed most of my things, because this is what I love. I've loved doing for a long time, and I've loved being a CPA. It's such an amazing profession, filled with people that actually do care objectively for their clients' best interests, regardless of what happens to them. And that's how we were taught in school. That's how we have this public trust to uphold, and we believe that when our clients do well, we do well. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave some information on the screen here for people to contact you. CLA has an incredible COVID-19 resource page that I recommend all of you guys go to. They've put it together in such a record time, and it's got a lot of different components to it, including leadership and operations, marketing, taxes, regulations, everything else. And we'll put that website up there as well. And the best way to contact, is it email is a good way for people to contact you?
Yeah, email me. I'm very diligent about communication, so by all means email me, and I know Beth is going to do a great job putting our contact information. If you just have questions during this time, we're here to help. We're all business owners. We want to help people, and we want to see this industry thrive throughout it. So by all means, if you have a one-off question, reach out to me, and we'll get you in the right place and take care of you.
This is wonderful. This has been wonderful. I'm promising everybody that we will come back with Mike with more questions, with more topics as we get more guidance on PPP forgiveness, or whether anything comes up with tax laws. There's a whole bunch of things that came in the CARES Act that have to do with some interesting tax provisions that I think you need to work through to potentially get some money back from prior years. So we'll talk about that in the future as well. And there might be new provisions that come out. This is election year. I think the politicians want to make sure that they at least be perceived as that they're doing something to help all of us, which is a good thing. So with that in mind, I want to thank you for coming on this show today, and we will continue our discussions in the upcoming weeks and months.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We'll talk soon. Be safe, everybody.